Hi, it's Andrew here from Vocabulary Ninja. And first of all, I just wanted to make an apology for the previous week where it didn't particularly go as planned, a little bit unexpected for me. And I guess for everyone that was in the room, definitely unexpected for you. And to be honest, as I said, very unexpected. And I've had to just put it down to one of those things where it just wasn't my day. And yeah, so the biggest disappointment was not being able to deliver the content that I'd planned and prepped to deliver at the conference. More importantly, so that you guys as staff could have that knowledge and understanding around vocabulary, and then even more importantly, be able to deliver that within the classroom and ultimately have that effect for your pupil premium children and everybody really. So what I wanted to do was make sure that I had you at least got something from me. So it's going to be a video recording of the session. I will try to keep it to 40 minutes as this session was intended, but it may run over a little bit. And I apologize that in having to watch this, you're having to do that in your own time rather than the dedicated time that the trust put aside in terms of your CPD. So this session, where I mumbled my words and got a bit stuck in the actual session, this session is all about vocabulary, as you know, and how you can utilize that to support pupils in terms of all pupils, but specifically your pupil premium children, and how that vocabulary can inspire them to become more confident readers, more inspired writers, and understand the curriculum in a more profound way. So we're going to start the session with a little bit of subject knowledge in terms of some small bits of research, just to give you that background around why pupil premium vocabulary is so important. And then we're going to use that research as a little bit of a lens to take us forward into the classroom and think which words, on a really, really simple level, which words should we be prioritizing in a really time poor environment, which is school and your classroom. In that time poor environment, how and which words should we prioritize to have the biggest impact on our pupils, not only on them individually, but also to support their reading. And even more importantly, I think the biggest bit is to have a real significant impact on their writing. So once again, like I said, I really do want to apologize for what happened a few weeks ago. I've put it down to being human, but we're going to dive straight into this content and make sure that I give you everything that I intended to support yourself and the pupils within your trust. So, as we said, with vocabulary and Vocabulary Ninja, one of the biggest things that we need to think about is us, ourselves. And it really is about our approach and awareness to the time that we have in the classroom, albeit limited, and having that consciousness to the opportunities that present themselves. And that may sound a little bit abstract, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that the reality of the primary classroom is that there isn't time to embed another system, and that vocabulary is all of a sudden going to have 20 minutes dedicated to it in the school day, because that's not possible. Okay. I've been in that position. You were all in that position, that the ability to be able to dedicate another 20 minutes to vocabulary within a condensed writing and reading curriculum is nearly impossible. So what we need to think about with vocabulary is where can we find those opportunities to embed them within what we're already doing. Okay, so the writing curriculum that we're already delivering, the foundation subjects we're already delivering, the opportunities in assembly, on the playground, every interaction with the child. So that's very much what today is about, and where those opportunities can be sculpted, created, and enhanced to make sure that everybody, and specifically our pupil premium children, are getting the best deal from you. And it's very much about you. You are the key factor in this, okay? And I'll go on to show you a little bit more about this. So within this slide here, these are sort of 4 words that I think are really crucial in terms of your own mentality when it comes to vocabulary. As you can see, those words are consistency, simplicity, marginal gains, and your own mentality. And all these words are absolutely crucial in terms of your ability to, moving forwards, find these opportunities over time and then them have an impact for the children. Because there isn't a magic wand. There's no magic wand that can be waved or a silver bullet fired that it's going to all of a sudden have children with extremely profound and rich vocabularies that are having significant impact on their work and their life chances. So the key part is, and that's why as a trust, this is really important for you, being consistent and keeping things as simple as possible, not a really complex system, simple processes, attacked and approached and embedded by everybody, so teaching assistants, senior leaders, obviously you as the classroom teacher. Over time, those marginal gains are going to accumulate into something significant, okay? As opposed to going, vocabulary, we're going to go really hard at vocabulary for 3 months and then it dies away and the impact is lost, okay? It's a little bit like one of the analogies that I normally use is sort of brushing your teeth. The impact from brushing your teeth comes from doing that every day. It isn't because you go and do it for 2 hours and, brushing your teeth consistently and thinking, wow, my teeth are super clean now because I've done it for 2 hours. In fact, that would probably be detrimental. The beauty of brushing your teeth is that it needs to happen for 2 minutes every day, twice a day, over the period of your life. And if you do that, your teeth will be free from cavities, you won't need fillings, and they'll probably be really nice and white, which would be fantastic. And if we can apply that into learning, that consistency and simplicity of just brushing your teeth every day and looking for that simple opportunity is where we're going to get the biggest impact from vocabulary. And that means for our pupils, it's also really simple and easy to engage with. Okay. So let's just have those in mind. Consistency, simplicity, marginal gains. So those small moments, those small interactions, those words every day accumulating over time. And that's really reinforced by this little piece of research. And it's the foundation of everything that I try to embed within primary school vocabulary. Okay. And my experience is exactly that. I've worked in primary schools as predominantly key stage 2, assistant head, deputy head, all the roles that are in there in between. And the reality when it comes to vocabulary is that it's very much down to you. And this piece of research, and when I say down to you, I mean down to you in terms of being a role model for how you speak and the opportunities that you present in terms of teaching vocabulary to children in the environment that we create. So with this piece of research, we can see here was produced by Hart and Risley over 20 years ago, but nonetheless, it's still crucial. The research sort of outlines the fact that a study was carried out with a range of different families from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And you can see that within the blue bubbles. From left to right, we have families that are what we consider the poorest families. And again, the likelihood is in those two bubbles to the left, we have our pupil premium families. And yes, there may be some to the right as well, but predominantly a larger proportion of pupils are going to come from families that are on benefits and families that are in that lower socioeconomic group. Okay. So what the study did was they spent a huge amount of time with these families, all different 4 types of families. And within that, they looked at the same type of metrics. So they looked at the number of words children were exposed to in those periods. They spent hour-long periods of times with the adults and the children. They looked at the total number of words that children were exposed. So let's just think about these really, really simply. They looked at the total number of words that children were exposed to. They looked at the complexity. They looked at conversational patterns. They looked at conversational duration. So how often conversations in those families would bounce between one and the other. They looked at things like how often children were read to, the prevalence of books in the home, a whole host of metrics linked to language, speech, and communication. And essentially what they found was that, as you can see there in the bottom left, 86 to 98% of the words, so if we go to that latter percentage, 98%, nearly 100% in some instances of the words used by children at age 3 would derive from their caregiver. Okay, so predominantly that's going to be their parent, the adult that they're exposed to. And let's just keep that phrase in mind, the adult that they're exposed to. And at home, that is the parent. So 98% of the language that that child had developed by age 3 was directly correlated to the adult and the adult environment that they were exposed to. Okay, so for me, that's really profound. And then moving forwards, you could say, well, okay, Andrew, Why is that so important? Okay, because those measures of, you know, language at age 3, as you can see in the bottom left, were directly related to academic performance at age 10 and 11. So key stage 2 SATs, although that wasn't the metric then, but academic performance at age 10 and 11 when children were leaving primary school could be directly correlated to the language that children had at age 3, okay, and beyond. So essentially what that's saying is that the the vocabularies and the language skills that children have, even at a young age, are massive indicators of how well children are likely to do academically in school. And there's a whole host of research as well that suggests children's reading age, or their ability to read, and their vocabulary at age 10 is just as significant an indicator to their academic performance at GCSE. So when we're trying to build this rationale as to, well, okay, Andrew, why is vocabulary important? There's a whole host of other studies that back this up as well in different with different lenses, but essentially they're all saying the same thing. And for me, what they're saying is that the adult that children are exposed to, okay, is the key factor in them developing their vocabularies and communication skills, their ability to have conversations, etc. Okay, so the children who were coming from the most wealthy families, if you think about what was happening there, exposed to a huge number of words per hour compared to their poorer counterparts. Okay, you can see that 616 words per hour. The wealthiest children exposed to over 2,000 words per hour. And within that will be repetition, but repetition is good. For hearing high quality language and it's being repeated, that's much more likely to stick as well. So the environment that they're exposed to, they're being read to in those higher quality environments. They're being exposed to other adults of higher quality in terms of their language and communication skills, the clubs that they're going to, the adults that they're exposed to there. They're being read to at home. They're being encouraged to read at home. So all those factors, those marginal gains, every single interaction with an adult is a role model based experience of language development. Okay. So if we flip that and go, okay, well, let's think about school. Then if we move way over to the right with this green bubble and we go, okay, who are the adults in school? Well, it's you. Okay, so every adult in school is also a role model for language and communication and vocabulary development. Every interaction you have with children is going to develop their vocabulary, their communication, their conversation skills in some way, shape, or form. Okay. And ultimately, what school is, the reason why that bubble is green is because school should be the exemplar environment in terms of the adult and the environment for vocabulary development. If we go right to that left bubble and think, okay, that's probably what we wouldn't want in terms of environment, in terms of poor quality adult conversation, language, vocabulary. What's the best version we could possibly hope to have? Well, it would be school, wouldn't it? It would be classroom where books are being read, children are being read to, adults are modeling and explicitly teaching high quality vocabulary, okay, throughout the curriculum. That's where we're going to get the biggest impact. So the whole point of this research, and although I've probably spent too much time on it, the whole point of this research is you going away and understanding that you are the most important person when it comes to children developing their vocabulary. And that's why, if we go back to the previous slide, you being a role model and being able to stay, the only way you're going to be a high quality role model for a long period of time is if it's simple and you can be consistent. Okay. If it's too difficult, it's too much work and it's too complex, you'll try, but inevitably we will fade away because there's other priorities in school. But if we can do things that are simple and we can do things that we can really be consistent with, like brushing our teeth, then that's when we'll see the impact. And that's what I'm here, or that's what I was here or there to try and deliver for you. So this is the lens that I want us to move through the rest of the training with. This is the lens that's going to give us the biggest impact and allow us to do vocabulary, use vocabulary in the small pockets of time that are already there, okay, without introducing something new. So you are the caregiver of vocabulary to the children in your school. And that sits exactly with your V value from voice, in that Every child has their own story. They aren't just a blue bubble from the poorest background, okay? They have their individual stories, and you have to take on that role and responsibility for being that caregiver to their individual story. And again, this slide just sort of highlights that, okay? And again, if we think about just specifically pupil premium and and this is a real generalization, and we're going to those polar opposites, these are just those hidden considerations that we need to think about when we're talking about language. And I've touched on these already. Is that with pupil premium children, the quality of talk, the conversation, that when we say adult exposure, you know what I'm talking about, is in that the role model of the adult in terms of the language that they're exposed to, whether that be going to clubs, after school clubs, school, whatever it may be, their parents, their aunties, their uncles, their grandparents, all of those people will impact on their vocabulary and their communication skills. If that environment is really poor, then the children's will be. There's no capacity. There is capacity there, but there's nothing to take them out of there. They will just become um, from the same pool. Okay, so that's why we need to try and give children the opportunities moving more to the right, where we have higher quality talk, higher quality conversation being modelled. The adults that they're exposed to in school all have that mentality that we need the highest quality language being modelled, being explicitly taught, etc. And again, in school, we've got book prevalence and so on. Okay. So, and again, the little question at the bottom is, who is this all dependent on? Quality of talk, conversation, the adults that children are exposed to beyond their parents, everybody else, the prevalence of books, real world experiences and time being spent read to. Who is that all dependent on? Well, it's not the child. Okay. It's definitely not the child. It's the adult. Okay. And unfortunately, in a lot of those blue bubbles, all of these are really poor or really limited. So everything in school is or should be the opposite. Okay. Really high quality and giving those children all of these opportunities and all of that exposure that we want them to have. So the next thing we want to think about are the tiers of vocabulary. Now, I can already feel that this is going to go way more than 40 minutes. So if you've only got a limited amount of time, I would suggest that you watch this little bit about the tiers of vocabulary. And if I would then maybe move on to something else in terms of your workload and come back to the practical ideas afterwards, because this section is just going to finish off the theory and how we can really have those lenses around where we're going to focus. Okay. So with vocabulary, here's some really specific subject knowledge that's going to enable us to think about how we can be more impactful within the classroom and more purposeful and more exact. So, and this is where, again, linked to your pupil premium voice, is this is where we can start to identify the needs of pupils. So we're not just guessing or generalizing, but we're providing the specific vocabulary that they're going to need in the right place and the right time. Okay. So this piece of research, or this model, is from Beck, 2013, Isabel Beck. And what this model suggests is that there are 3 tiers of vocabulary, and we need to, as teachers, we need to understand these tiers. So I'll run through them and I'll give you some insights around them. So with tier 1 vocabulary, what we have are essentially everyday words. And again, you've probably read this ahead of me. Tier 1 words, everyday words that we use in speech and communication. So while I'm doing this, think about what I've already spoken about in terms of the blue bubbles and the role of the adult. So think about your pupil premium children and the environments that they're exposed to. These words are rarely needed in teaching and are learned through conversation. So there's an assumption here that children have these words, but children from the poorest backgrounds will have limited numbers of these. And there's thousands and thousands of these words, super basic words that we would just assume that children know. There's some examples there: happy, sad, hungry, run, play, scared. Okay. Pupil premium children, as we said, will have a limited number of these. And obviously, children who are English as an additional language or children who have additional needs maybe will have a lower percentage of these tier 1 assumed words within their own vocabulary. But these words are essential for general understanding and their general ability to converse and to read as well, in terms of reading for understanding. And moving forwards, I will give you some ways to prioritize tier one vocabulary, but this is absolutely essential. Okay. Tier two vocabulary is probably where you're going to focus the majority of your time in terms of some direct teaching of vocabulary. Okay, so tier two vocabulary are words that are found in many different content areas. They overlap, and they're very high frequency. And as you can read there, often require an element of teaching, cross curricular, and are crucial for widening understanding. Okay, so these are the types of words that we could teach, and they will um, intersect into different subject areas. Okay, so we might come across them in reading, but they are applicable in history and geography and potentially science as well. So their meaning is very, very deep. Okay, and quite often these will require a little bit of teaching for children to properly understand them and then to be able to use them within their reading and writing. Okay, very versatile words. And this is why it's really important to understand the tiers of vocabulary, because in school, if we think we are really time poor and words are so important, then we really need to think, well, which words are important? Which words are we going to teach? If we can find 5 minutes a day in an English lesson, which is when I'm going to suggest you do this because this links directly to writing, that 5 minutes needs to be very, very well chosen. Okay, so this tier of vocabulary for me is the lens to help us choose the right words. And if we've only got 2 or 3, maybe 5 minutes a day, then we need to be probably choosing tier two vocabulary to teach to the majority of pupils. Okay, tier one, we can do other things to support that in a more relaxed way. Okay, and then so tier two, have that in mind. And then tier three words are really subject specific words that are only going to appear in context. So what that means is they are very low frequency and they mean what they mean. Okay. So an example of tier two, if we just drop back, would be a word like invade. Invade could so we would teach what invade means, and I won't do that now. But invade could very easily predominantly link to history. But then it could link to geography in terms of an invasive species. It could link to science in terms of germs and bacteria. It could link to ICT in terms of invasion of privacy, etc., and so on. And there's probably a whole host of other things where invasion, actually understanding what invade means, in terms of history, yeah, predominantly that's how we teach it. But then that knowledge of the word invade is crucial for then understanding what invasion of privacy means. If we understand it in a historical context, that can very, very easily be applied to then unlocking that knowledge in another subject area. Oh, invasion of privacy must mean this because we understand that. But the crux of that is specifically having taught the word invade as a tier two word. Whereas tier three words, as I've just said, are really, really subject specific words. So, for example, photosynthesis is a classic one. And I can totally understand us wanting to teach that word and children being able to go home and say, wow, photosynthesis, this is what it means. Great. But that's never going to crop up in reading or writing unless you're reading about plants and their ability to create energy from the sun. So and that subject specific vocabulary, we would really keep that in that science lesson. Okay, we would teach it in there, maybe pre teach 10 words at the start of a subject or a new topic like photosynthesis. So if you're doing parts of the plant, you would pre teach a lot of those tier three words. Stamen, great, but that's never going to crop up in reading or be useful within children's writing generally as a rule of thumb. So that word isn't useful enough and versatile enough to teach if we're going to find and apply a consistent and simple 5 minute teaching window every day. Okay. So the tiers of vocabulary really help us as a primary school teacher or a secondary school teacher identify which words we want to teach because of their versatility and their value to help children make links in terms of understanding, but also unlock understanding as well. Okay, so tiers of vocabulary, super important, and they're really going to help us identify the types of words that we need to be teaching our children every day. So, as I said, tier one vocabulary. We're going to start at the beginning, and this is so the research part and the little bit of subject knowledge around tiers is done. Everything else now in this presentation is going to be about what you can do. Okay, resources, suggestions, tasks, activities. Really, really simple. So the first 4 or 5 slides that I've got here are around how we can really promote tier one vocabulary. We're not going to explicitly teach tier one vocabulary. We're going to try and do that through other methods, okay? And these are things that you're doing already that you can probably just enhance. So one of the first things we can look to do, again, this is all about thinking. Tier one vocabulary is all to do with you. The way you speak, the way you engage with children, the way you promote conversation, the way you model language in front of them, that is all going to develop their tier one vocabulary, okay? So really think about activate. This is all about activation. So you're doing it already. How can we make it even better? How can we make it supercharged? All right. So activating routines throughout the primary schools are superb at routines. You've got morning routines, lining up, dinner time, breaks, all of these routine, even routines within the classroom, there's opportunities to be explored where there's probably nothing else really happening. Okay. So arriving, lining up, transitions, all 30 seconds at a time, but all going to be consistently valuable. All right. Think about using some of these words when you're in these moments. So prepositions, and you don't need to necessarily explain to the children. It's not necessarily a teaching moment, but what you're looking to do is model some of this language, making sure that you're using words like behind, between, inside, beside, towards, and though. That could be lining up. That could be situations in the classroom for PE, for lunch, for end of day on the morning. Modeling these words and specifically for this as well, we're thinking about pupil premium, target those pupil premium children. If they're stood with certain individuals, can you go and stand beside Jennifer or whoever it may be? So they really start to understand what beside means. Okay. And it might be that there's instances where you can clearly see they don't understand excuse me, what that actually means. So these prepositions of place are really, really important. And once children understand these, they'll be able to understand them in reading and be able to apply them within writing. Okay. But this is all about building that foundation. If they don't have the foundation, we can't build the house. And that's what tier one vocabulary is all about. And again, you can see other words that we can look to just have. You could pop these onto a little sheet on your lanyard, laminate them, whatever you wanted to do to remember them. But ultimately, this is all about being aware. It's a state of mind, a consciousness. Okay. Time words, before, after, again, these are prepositions really, but before, after, until, while. These are all things that we can be modeling within the classroom, within routines. And then again, basic classroom routines, collect. Don't just say get. Go and get this. Because there's no value in that word of get. Go and collect. Please return. Can you place? Okay. Ensure you carry. Can you arrange? Okay. Rather than can you sort out? This is probably how I would say it. So all of that language is really, really important. But again, just think about that blue bubble on the left. That language isn't there at home, okay? But if it is there in the classroom, there's no additional plan. There's no planning to this. It's just building it into who you are as the classroom teacher and starting to use that language within the classroom all the time when you're speaking to children and asking them to do things. And then imagine if everybody's doing this, your classroom assistants, the people in the office, the SLT, everybody matters when it comes to this, all right? And then again, I've sort of already touched on this, is that, classroom instructions, that got, get, went type thing and do, I call these sort of hollow verbs, okay? They're very high frequency. We use them a lot, okay? But they don't add any level of specificity, okay? We want to be very specific because, got, get, and went come up in writing, but collect, arrange, I can see that straight away. Collect and arrange classic words that are going to come up in a SATs paper or, the reading paper or the grammar paper in terms of children's understanding, okay, of what collect actually means. So these words are hugely versatile, even though very, very simple. Okay, and we can expand go and get into things like fetch. I'm just reading from the slide here. Fetch, gather, choose, check, compare, sort, whisper, pause, whatever it may be. Okay. Think about the language that you're using. Okay. And it's maybe that you just take a week to just think, right, okay, what does my language actually look like? And all of a sudden, by modeling this throughout your routines, throughout your week and your school and every classroom, throughout all of you as members of staff, that's going to be hugely powerful. And again, here's another example for tier one. And this is maybe a little bit further down the school. I always want to make sure that EYFS feel like this is important. And, that previous slide is everybody, but EYFS key stage one, absolutely crucial. Okay, absolutely crucial. Now, with environments, we really want to start to think about, again, activating them. We have these environments already. So again, within this image, you can see we've got a fantastic tough tray with lots of equipment, filters, we've got pipes, we've got, what else have we got? We've got bottles, syringes, cylinders, fantastic. Loads of great nouns. Okay, really specific. Now, what the typical thing is here, again, if we think about the role of the adult and we think about the coming into this environment, the really poor way of coming into this, the pupil premium way of coming into this environment, that blue bubble on the left, is to come into this environment and not particularly interact with it, not particularly model any great levels of language with the children, and just maybe have a conversation about what they did at dinner time. Oh, hi, Fred, what have you done at dinner time then? And that's it, as they're sort of in the environment, assuming that it's the child that's going to develop anything. And it really isn't. Again, you are the caregiver of language and communication. So it's our responsibility to activate these areas. And what I would suggest we do is when we have these tough trays, look at the language that's hanging around it or in it. And this is going to be specifically chosen by you as a teacher. And this is a prompt for you and for the other adults that come into this environment, whether it's the head teacher who's popped down into EYFS and they're interacting with children, having a bit of a chat. It's the head teacher's responsibility then as the caregiver to use this language in their conversation with the children to develop these words like scatter and fill and pour and rough and smooth, and to model it with the equipment and to activate that conversation with the children, to prompt them to start to use this language as well. Because this language then starts to crop up in their reading as well. Okay. And the stories, one of the books that I had ready to show you was We're Going on a Bear Hunt. And We're Going on a Bear Hunt starts to have this language within it. Okay. Really simple, just like all the books will. Okay. It's not just that book, but all of these words are words that children need to understand. As I've said, they are the foundations. And if they're going to develop vocabulary, they need to do it hearing adults use that language as well. Hearing it and seeing it. Okay. So what does scattering actually look like? Okay. Can we, whatever the little flakes and beans are and stuff that are in that environment, can we scatter them? Can we get the children to actually scatter it? Can we then scaffold that into a sentence so the children can hear what that sounds like and prompt them to say it? Can you say a sentence with scatter in it and then show me? Great. That is so much more purposeful. That environment and that time is exactly the same. The only difference is it's being activated with the purpose of T1 vocabulary being ready to be used and activated for the child. Okay. And that's going to be really, really powerful. Okay. So again, very simple, no extra time, huge amount of extra value. And again, let's look at another thing that we can do, activating reading. So with this, again, reading aloud, really simple with micro pauses. So again, it's that all this is just thinking about that when we're obviously, if we're not reading aloud, I'm working on the basis that children are read to aloud in your schools. I assume that is the case. But during those story times, be active and pick out 2 or 3 words. And that's all we're going to do because we can't activate every piece of vocabulary within a story. Okay. But during your story time, pick out a couple of everyday words that might be insecure and do the following. Explain the meaning, as you can see below. Model it if possible. So it might be, again, so if it's possible to model that in terms of show the children, if it was stumble, for example, in bear hunt, okay, you might just stand up and stumble. You could get the children to stumble, okay, so that they understand what that means, what that looks like, what that feels like, okay. That word's being activated, chances are you're going to read that story a couple of times, okay? And eventually the children will understand what those words mean, and then we've got a greater chance of that becoming part of their vocabulary. A word that probably wouldn't Again, if we're focusing on pupil premium children, that probably isn't already part of their vocabularies. Once it becomes part of their vocabularies, it'll become part of their spoken and their written vocabulary. They will be able to use it, okay, and use it to understand. So really important. And that's a really simple routine. We don't want 4 or 5 or 6. That's too many. Okay. We're going to spoil the story and we haven't got the time. Okay. But every time, read aloud, micro pauses, 2 or 3, already have those words in mind. Maybe you'll probably know the book. Very, very simple. And again, this is something you're already doing. There's no extra time, but there's only upside from this. And the children are getting something that they wouldn't get at home in that PP, two blue bubbles to the left. And again, this is something new that I developed. I developed this for you guys specifically. I hadn't. These are brand new resources, and what I wanted to do was make sure that you had things to go away with and do. And I think PE is a really underutilized opportunity to develop vocabulary. And you may think, well, he's stretching here a little bit, but I think this is so basic. And if you use this QR code, what this will do is this will download some documents for you for the resources that I've created. All right. So I wanted to provide you that. And basically what I want you to think about are PE warm-ups. All right. And I'm going to develop some more resources around this, some presentations that you can maybe use as a bigger screen. But what I've developed are some word bank. You can see on the left here some word banks of words that you can use in terms of a PE warm-up. So you've got your school hall, very, very simple. Verbs, prepositions, sequence words, and adverbs. Again, hugely tier 1. Okay, but we want children to know these words. So let's use them as part of a PE warm-up. Those verbs of walk, run, jog, jump, hop, skip, step, march, that's it. That's a warm-up. It's dead easy. Get the children moving around, listening for the words that you say, and then it's very easy to get them to do things like, going under and over and through. We can pretend that. And again, we could sequence them. First walk. You could put these together in terms of memory. First walk, then jog, then reach, and then stretch, whatever it may be. So you could put a little sequence together. And then you could do it quickly as well. You could say slowly jump, or you could say carefully turn, and then quickly skip. Okay, so the children start to associate that physical movement. You're getting the benefit of a PE warm-up that actually, in doing all the things, is probably quite a good warm-up. But the actual benefit of that is that we're embedding the vocabulary within that. They've done it, and I would be getting children to say the words as well as they're doing it. Okay, so if I say jump, they would chant that back to me. Okay, so we've got that physical movement, the verbalization of the word, and then hearing you say it. By the way, you're a primary school teacher, so you're probably modeling it as they go. So you're probably hopping and skipping and bending and everything else that goes with it. All right? Really great. And then I've taken that a step further. If you look at the other two documents here, we've got phrases. Okay, so the bottom or the middle resource, there's a few of these, again, that if you use the QR code, you'll be able to access these, that are basically phrases. And again, it's quite small, but it says run towards the gate quickly. And these are starting to embed stories. Okay, so this is a villain chase. All right, so run towards the city gate quickly. So we would get the children to do that. Jump over what does it say? Jump over the broken barrier. So there's an element of storytelling, of imagination, the physical warm up for the children. But then they're doing, the verbs that are in here that they're doing and performing are really, really, and quite easily, I'm sure as a primary school teacher, you could up level this really, really quickly. This is for tier 1, but with tier 2 vocabulary in terms of some of the verbs that we want children to do, we could up level these quite quickly. So you can use those sequence ones. Again, have a look at them and see how they'll work. There's some instructions there, but very simple. And we're starting to build in this storytelling warm-up. And then further to that, we've got, as you can see on the right, we've got movement stories. So I've got complete stories that you can read out for the children with some instructions at the top. But these are all these words and phrases, Leo. So again, you're going to read the story aloud and the children are going to perform that story as they move around the hall, imagining it. And I can imagine these being fabulous, especially in Key Stage 1. Leo stepped into the jungle and began to walk towards the tall trees. And I could imagine the children, they'd be fabulous, okay? You're getting the P warm up via a story, but it's a movement story with vocabulary at the heart of it, okay? So use those. And again, here's the beauty. This is something that you do already in school. There's no additional time other than this is your 10-minute PE warm up. Fab. Once you've downloaded the resources and used them, if there's any other stories or topics that you want me to make them around, drop me an email, andrew@vocabularyninja.co.uk, and I'll be more than happy to make some more and get them up on the website or just send you them, basically. So again, super easy way to use vocabulary or prioritize vocabulary within PE. And then finally, there's a few other ways here that we can start to promote Tier 1 vocabulary through conversation. And again, this is just thinking about this throughout the year or time that you spend with children. Parental engagement, really sort of promoting that concept of conversation, which can be difficult. But the top tip here is just thinking about a little one that schools often like, just ask me about stickers. So we've all got these rows of stickers in school. And again, if everybody knows what this is about, you could make them, you could probably pre-print them with "ask me about" on it. But if every adult in the school knows what these are for, these aren't just to be like, "Oh, hi Jennifer, what did you have for your dinner?" Okay. The reason for these are to promote opportunities for those children to have conversations with adults. So if the adults know, the dinner staff, the caretaker, the TAs, every teacher, they see a child walking along with, "Ask me about my history lesson." Yeah. "Ask me about my reading today." Yeah. If any adult sees that, they engage that child in a conversation. And you're not sticking these on every kid. Okay, you're sticking them on your pupil premium children or the children that you want to engage in conversation. Now, you're not going to put children under pressure, but the majority of children will love having the opportunity of adults asking them about it. And the likelihood, if it's about their reading book and 4 or 5 adults ask them, they're going to have a similar conversation every time. But that's fine. That repetition is important. And the adult conversation, the adult in the conversation is a different high quality adult to you that they're interacting with and having that conversation. And the whole purpose of the conversation is not for the adult to ask closed questions where the child is going to say yes or no. We want to ask open questions where the child has the opportunity to elaborate. Why do you like that character, Freddie? Freddie has the opportunity to talk. Okay. You have the opportunity to then model coming back about that. That's fantastic, Freddie. Well done. What do you think's going to happen next? Essentially, it's a reading lesson, but you can see, and it only has to be 30 seconds, and then we move on. And then Freddie bumps into the caretaker who's wandering through the hall, who spots the sticker. Brilliant. Freddie gets engaged in another conversation with a different adult who's also high quality. Then he goes and gets his dinner, and the deputy head's in there, doing a little bit of dinner time duty or whatever it may be. "Freddie, tell me about your book." "Fantastic. What are you reading?" "Oh, why do you like again?" Okay. So the child's building that confidence. They're building that confidence interacting with adults, but it's opportunities for us to model that high quality language. And again, really, really simple. We don't want to be doing this all the time with 5 kids every day, but maybe once or twice a week, we target an individual. Target sounds really bad. We focus and prioritize an individual. But if everybody in the school knows why that is, that consistency and that simplicity, again, there's no extra time to that. There's nothing extra that you need to do other than have a roll of stickers. And when you decide that that's important for those children, you might do it every day with a different child. Fine. And in primary schools, they're probably buzzing to be that kid, okay, because they know what's going to happen. Mr. Henderson's going to speak to them. Mr. Newing, Mrs. Bradley's going to speak to them. Brilliant. Okay. All of that's fantastic, but it's no extra time for anybody. It's just those adult interactions. And think about it again. That green bubble right back at the start, all of these simple tier 1 things are creating that high quality green bubble with high quality adult experiences, being read to, high quality stories in PE, all of a sudden that happening every day over the course of the year with no real extra effort. is going to have a huge impact on your pupils. And again, this was just the example of invasion. I'll probably move that in future slides. But again, we'll leave that there. So the next part of the training is now focusing on tier 2 vocabulary. And at this point, there's another QR code there because I'll probably run through this in about 10-15 minutes, but there is sort of a 30 or 40 page document of how this is all about the word of the day and how we're going to focus on teaching explicit vocabulary for 5 or 10 minutes. At 5 minutes, you could do this in, ideally at the start of an English lesson, that's then going to filter through into the rest of those English or writing lessons and hopefully translate through into children's writing. Okay. So again, everything that's in this document is very specifically detailed and outlined. So download it. It's 30 or 40 pages. There's a huge amount of content there, basically outlining the word of the day, how you deliver it, how you set up your classroom, and the impact that we're looking for as well. Great stuff. So I just took a quick break there and realized I was already 45 minutes into recording this. So we definitely wouldn't have got through anything. So it's maybe better that what happened did, because you're going to get all the content that you need. So we've probably got another 20 minutes of content to get through, just to make sure you've got a real understanding of what you can do next to really well teach the tier 2 vocabulary. I think we've got some great ideas there that everybody can embed to enhance tier 1 vocabulary within everything that we're doing. But let's take a look at tier 2. So with tier 2, as we said from Isabel Beck's recommendations with tier 2, is that it does need some level of, or will over time, need some level of explicit instruction. So we need to teach these words, all right? Now, the easiest way to do it is to just think, right, can we dedicate, it says here, 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes daily vocabulary instruction, okay, where we're going to teach new vocab, predominantly tier 2, and that's going to have a big impact on pupils consistently over time. And again, we want to do it simply, we want to do it effectively, and we want to get those marginal gains. And again, if everybody does this through a school over a year, over 2 years, over 3 years, children are going to be taught a huge amount of vocabulary that's extremely versatile and extremely valuable. Okay. So for me, we want to do this at the beginning of an English lesson because T2 vocabulary, yes, we want children to understand it for reading, but we also want them to use it within their writing. For me, that's the biggest value that can be added. Using it in their spoken language, also using it and being able to draw it out into their written work. Okay, that's the beauty of it. Okay, so that makes sense to teach it at the start of an English lesson. And for me, it's the perfect way to start an English lesson. If we think about the progression of a lesson, the words are the building blocks, the piece of writing at the end of the week is the house. So it makes complete sense to work from a word to a sentence level to paragraphs to pieces of writing over the course of the week. So starting an English lesson with the word of the day makes complete sense to me. You could do it in 5 minutes. 10 minutes is probably a little bit better, but I appreciate not everyone has 10 minutes. So the idea is that we start to build this 10-minute teaching cycle, 5 to 10-minute teaching cycle every day. So if we have a look at this slide, we've got at the top, teaching vocabulary. So that's where we're going to teach a new word. Okay. Once we've taught it, what's going to happen is we're going to record and display this word. So you're going to find a display board within your classroom, and that is going to be dedicated to the new vocabulary that you are teaching. And that display board is there for the pupils, but it's also there for you. We're trying to make your life easy and make you the most effective teacher you can, or the most effective vocabulary tool that you can be. Okay, we're talking about being that ultimate caregiver, and you can't remember everything. So by having this display board, that's going to maximize your opportunities to repeat and use this and model this vocabulary again and again and again. And that's the third strand. Okay, so we teach it, we record and display it. I'm going to show you how to do that. Very simple. And then you're going to model it over time. Again, the next day, the next day, the next day. Okay. You don't need a plan to do that because those words are on the display board and you've already taught them. Okay. So again, The more you repeat it, the more chance it's going to stick. And then once it's stuck, the children can then use it and utilize it. Okay? And again, that's that ongoing independent application. And this cycle should just spin. Everybody's doing it every day, teaching that vocabulary, tier 2, while all the tier 1 stuff's going on, the activating environments and routines and PE warm-ups. There's loads of other ways as well, but we just don't have time today. All right. So how do we do it? This is how we're going to do it, via the word of the day. Now, I'm going to show you 2 ways. The first way, you could basically just pick your own vocabulary from the books that you're reading. That's the second way. My way is through the Vocabulary Ninja word of the day. All right. And all the resources are free just on my website to get. So the website's there. I upload a weekly teaching pack of 10 words, 5 tier 2 words and 5 tier 1 words. Tier 1 are called grasshopper, as you can see here on the left. Grasshopper words, it's maybe that I need to change that into just tier 1. But it's not necessarily about them being tier 1. Yes, okay, that's fine. Those foundational words, and then the shinobi word of the day is more often a tier 2 word, or a word that is just going to be an authorial word that you're going to see in writing that you would want children to replicate. So yes, tier 1 and tier 2 is important, but we don't need to get too hung up on it. You've got some subject knowledge now, but you're now well informed to make better decisions around the types of language that you need to choose. Okay, if that makes sense. So don't get too hung up on it. But again, this pack is there weekly. There's probably 5 years worth of packs on the website in terms of the archive that you can access. The only problem with my words of the day are they're going to be a little bit non-specific to maybe the book that you are teaching. Okay. But lots of people like to use my resources because you know you're going to get the coverage, the resource is already made, and the likelihood over a period of time is that these words will naturally crop up in the books that you're teaching from anywhere. Okay. Regardless, they're going to be extremely useful and extremely versatile. Okay. So, and over time, once you're confident teaching from my resources, you can then very, very easily utilize or introduce your own words and possibly teach without a slide or teach with a really minimal slide that you're developing yourself. Okay. So there's ways and means to go around it. So this is where you'll find on my website. If you go to, you can see the nav bar at the top. We've got vocabulary. I'll just play this video. So again, vocabninja.co.uk. If you just go over, you don't need to sign in, go to vocabulary word of the day. That page will load. And then we've got this week's pack and next week's pack on the right in a PDF and a PowerPoint. And they're just there, updated every week for you to download. No sign in. And then below, we've got a word of the day search tool where you can type in words. So if it is a word that you want to teach from your book, for example, you can maybe search for it. And the likelihood is it's probably there. Okay. There's lots and lots. There's thousands of words in that library. Okay. If it's not there, you can request it and we will make it and we will send it to you. So there's probably not too much more we could do there for you to put you in a position where you don't really have to do anything other than teach the words. Okay. Send a request. We'll get those words made and we'll send them back to you. Really simple. So again, if you want a sample pack, use this QR code and it'll download a weekly pack so you can get a little bit of an idea of what's happening in there. So you've got the teaching slides. Then if you move through, there's a couple of little activities where there's some vocabulary tasks for children to do. And then right at the end, probably the best bits are display slips. So when we're talking about displaying the words, these words are already on display slips, A4 landscape. So there's 2 on a sheet. And the idea with these is that at the start of the week, you can just print them off. And then when you teach them, they just go on your display board. Super simple. So you don't even have to do that. Okay. So this teaching cycle is fully resourced. It's free. You don't have to sign up for it. And it's all there designed so that you can just have that 5 to 10 minute teaching moment, teach it really, really well, display it, forget about it, come back to it, half an hour later, an hour later, I guarantee you the opportunities will be there. Okay. So really simple. So as I said, you can choose my word of the day packs and just do it that way, really simple. Or you can just use the books if you're feeling super confident already. We just need to use the tiers of vocabulary to look at the text that we're using. So if we're using, well, it doesn't matter which book we're using, as a teacher, you would read a chapter ahead and understand which vocabulary is coming. And then on a weekly basis, you would choose 5 words and you would teach one of those words every day. Okay. And ideally, those would be tier 2 words or really highly authorial language that's going to crop up again in this book, the next book, another book, and possibly linked to different subject areas as well. That's your tier 2. And again, I've just sort of said that, but that's sort of what this looks like. If this is an example from room 13, if I was teaching from room 13, I would ideally be a chapter ahead or a few pages ahead of where I was reading, and I would know which vocabulary opportunities were coming. Okay, so you can see here in the examples, we've got some fabulous vocabulary that, again, looks quite simple, but I'd be over the moon if children were using this language in their writing, okay? Especially my pupil premium children who won't, okay? It's probably not in their vocabulary to do that, okay? But if we model it and we use it over and over again, they will. I guarantee you they will, okay? And it'll come through in their writing. So again, words like afraid, gloomy, squeal, whimpered, trembling, clutched, decide, okay? You know, decide's a really simple word, but how often do children use that word? Okay, you might want to choose to teach it. It's very high frequency. Okay? We want children to be able to understand the word decision and decide and the different variations of it. And we want that to be part of children's vocabulary. Really, really simple. Clutched, you know, really high frequency word, isn't it? You know, that word clutched is an authorial word, isn't it? They clutch something. But what does that mean? Okay, it's like children will understand that as got hold of, but we want them to understand what clutched means. So let's teach it clutch. You know, we would teach the word clutch and then we would teach the variations of that. It would go up on the board and we would constantly try to use that in our own language. We would model it in writing sessions and that word will become part of children's vocabularies. Okay. So you would just pick, there's loads there. And that's just the first, page 9, 10, 11, and 12, the first chapter. There's lots of words that I could choose there to teach in week 1. Very, very simple. Okay. Words that I want children to use in their writing. And again, there's a word in there that I always sort of reference, and this is where you need to have those conversations with children, and this is your subject knowledge. The word stalactites in the first image, okay? Arguably, well, not arguably, it is. That's a tier 3 word, really, in the sense that it's a rock or ice formation. I can't remember which way around it is that hangs down or up. I think it's down. And you would want a child to understand what that word means. But I wouldn't teach that as a word of the day. I would reference that word and maybe have a picture of it so children understand what it looks like, as a stalactite. A little bit like the activating reading with tier 1 words where we would stop, we would tell children what that word means, and then we would move on, okay? You could quickly Google that and show them what a stalactite is. Job done. Okay, so they visually understand what that is for the story. Word of the days, I'd be focusing more on looming, and so my 5 words that I would pick from there would probably be looming, whimpered, trembling, clutched, and maybe decide. I quite like damp as well because I think there's quite a sensory thing to damp, and I would, again, it seems like a really, really simple word, but I would want children to do that because the authorial essence of using the word damp is that it's the sense that it provokes in the reader. Okay, so it's really interesting, isn't it? And just by spending a couple of minutes, you could pick these out very simply, or you can just use my words of the day. But it's really straightforward to do. Now, once you've chosen your words, or you're using my word of the day packs, it's completely up to you. You're just going to teach them. It's very simple. So from the slides, the really simple way to do it to start with is just to introduce the slide. So if we were to do it here, we would introduce the word in terms of return. Really simple word that we've chosen to teach, probably tier 1. But again, I want to articulate the word to the children so they see it, they hear it, and they get the opportunity to speak it. Okay, so I would introduce you. Today, boys and girls, we're learning the word return. I would say out loud, return. Can you, boys and girls, can you say return too? So they would say it as well. Brilliant. So they can sort of speak that word as well. I'd then explore the syllables. Okay, so this word has 2 syllables. So we've got return. I'd get the children to repeat that and clap it so that I'm doing that for the spelling. I normally go into this much more deeply, but I'm just whizzing through it for the sake of this video. So again, we're just softly reinforcing just a bit of a spelling strategy. Okay, referencing the syllables. There's 2 syllables in this word, 2 beat, return. Okay, return. Because I want the children to spell the word correctly as well. So if that helps, fantastic. Great. We've introduced the word, and obviously we're going to reference the word class next. Okay, so we've taught the word, we've introduced the word, it's return. We've explored the syllables. That's going to take 30 seconds. We're then going to give the definition of the word. So as we can see in the green sentence, boys and girls, we've got the children were glad to return to their school. Great. Okay. So we're going to explore. So to return. So as you can see at the top, boys and girls, return could operate as a verb or a noun. Okay. So if we return and we move from one place to another, that would be a verb. So return can be used as a verb. Okay. And it is in this example, the children were glad to return to their school. Okay. So they've come back. Very simple. But we could also have a return if we think about, and again, you would need to prep this in your head a little bit, like a parcel. Okay. So Amazon, you might have a parcel that comes and it needs to go back. It's not doing anything, but it is called a return. It's a return. Okay. So again, the children it's going to take 30 seconds to a minute to introduce the concept of what return actually means. Okay. You might even have a little classic. I've got a parcel here from Amazon. That's probably why I said it. You could have a pair of scissors ready on your desk and you could go, look, I'm going to return the scissors to the scissor block. So the children visually understand what return means. Fantastic. Job done. That is it. You've taught it. It's taken a minute or so. And then we've got the opportunity to apply it and give the children a little bit of time to have a discussion themselves. And that discussion isn't idle. What I would be expecting the children to do is to then develop a sentence themselves using the word return. Okay. So again, if you're tight on time, you're probably not going to give the children and again, this is all about routines. You're probably not going to give them that minute to have a conversation. But if you've got really good routines and you feel like you've got the time, that offers the opportunity to give the children, so, right, boys and girls, off you go. You've got 1 minute, talk to your talking partner, come up with a paired sentence between you both using the word return. And you'll have loads of children who have got you know what happens in these moments is that children will come up with all the other words that go with it as well. Slowly, carefully return. Brilliant, Jessica. Brilliant, Ahmed. Well done. That's great. And that's fantastic. Okay. Because that's what we want to see in their writing. If they can say it, they can speak it. And again, you'll have children partnered up with specific people. Again, if your TA is with a specific group of children, I would get them modeling sentences and modeling orally how to use that word within a sentence as well. And return is very, very simple. There will be other words that are a bit more complex. But you give them a snappy minute, brilliant. You might want to hear one or two. Mark, can you read yours out? Fantastic, well done. And it might be that there's someone over in a different group or a different position in the classroom that you've already know they've got a really good sentence and you want to build their confidence. And it's more about them, how they've used return. Off you go. Fantastic. So that's been celebrated. Took very, very little time, really effective, little bit of oracy built into there. Right, boys and girls, fantastic. Now we're going to write those sentences. And what I would do, I'll just get a book out of the drawer. Not prepped. That doesn't really matter. What I would do is at the back of their English books, most of us are working in A4, your traditional school books. At the back of the book, in the margin, I would write the word of the day or the date and the word of the day. So we've got a record. And then the child would write the sentence that they've come up with and they would underline it. Okay. I don't think this needs marking particularly because we don't need any additional time spent on it. But them physically turning those oral words into written words, that process is important. They've had an oral opportunity to rehearse the sentence, and I know I'm making this quite a long process talking about it, but it can be really snappy in the classroom. Okay, 1 minute, off you go. It could be 30 seconds. Talk about with your talking partner. Great, they've got a sentence. Okay, fantastic, boys. And once this becomes a routine, the children naturally start to write those sentences down anyway, and the oral opportunity just merges into the written one. So they're recording it and they're underlining it. Now, the beauty of that as well is we're not going to use that as an assessment thing. It doesn't need marking. But what that also is we're going to display it on the display board as well. But because that's recorded in the back of the book, wherever the child is in the school, they might go to the library to work, they might go to intervention, whatever it may be. That record of that vocabulary is in the back of their book. They can flick to that anytime they want. Fantastic. And they can use that vocabulary within their writing. So on Friday or whenever they're writing, they could very easily just dip to the back of their book, look at some of that vocabulary, and they could include that. And the beauty of that is they've maybe got vocabulary from a couple of months ago that was from a previous unit. Oh, brilliant. I remember that one. I'm going to use adverse or whatever it was, the adversity. Brilliant. Blah, blah, blah. And that goes it. Okay. So that record is really important, and that's promoting independence. So within that, I've probably rambled on a little bit, but that can be done very, very snappily. You teach it, you tell them what it is, you knuckle into the grammar bit, you read the sentence aloud to them so they understand what the word is, you give them a talking pairs opportunity, minimal, it could be 20 seconds. Talk to it, come up with a sentence, fantastic, okay, hear a couple very, very quickly, write it in your books in the back, maybe hear another one that's written down, fantastic, job done, word of the day is done. But you've really intensely and explicitly dove into that. And again, imagine that 5 or 6 minutes where there's no real effort to it in terms of teaching it. Imagine everybody in the school doing that every day. That 5 minutes just accumulating over a half term, a term, a year, the 6 years that children are in school. The impact of that is going to be massively significant. It won't be if you do it for 2 months and then stop, because the kids can't do it on their own. That's you being the caregiver of language and vocabulary and communication. All right. So that's my little soapbox bit. But if we can do this consistently, I've built the mini system so that there's literally nothing you have to do. Okay. If you want, all right, yes, you've got to download the pack and display it and print a couple of slips off and stick them up once a day. But there's no time involved in that at all. Okay. So a really simple system for teaching the vocabulary. Now, once we've taught it, we want to display it. And this is what it looks like from different classrooms who've done it over the years. And really, really simply, we want to accumulate that vocabulary over the course of, I would say, a half term. These are like half terms worth of vocabulary. Now, obviously, these were pre-display slips that I'd added into the packs, and this was my classroom. So the pink background one, that's my former classroom. And again, in hindsight, I look back at this thing and think, probably wouldn't join it now. I would just print it because I want everybody, wherever they are in the classroom, to be able to reference and use this language and spell it correctly. And the key bit is that because this vocabulary accumulated over time, I was constantly referring to this all the time in my teaching. English lessons, maths lessons, as children were coming in from as children were coming in from break time and dinner time. This language, because it was valuable enough to be on this display, and lots of displays aren't, for me, it's either celebrating children's work or it has to be something that's inherently valuable in the classroom. And I don't think there's anything more invaluable than this, okay? And it's live. It's part of the ongoing learning journey in the classroom, okay? And look at the language there on that display board. If that language was coming up in your writing, even 30% of it, nearly every teacher in England would be probably happy, okay? Or I was happy anyway from my children. And that language did come through, okay? Because it was there. Then when I modeled writing on the whiteboard, this was basically next to it. So I was constantly pulling in this language, orally modeling it, creating this green bubble environment where vocabulary was just at the heart of everything that I was doing. And there was no effort to it because I'd set the little system up of displaying it. Then my teaching assistant would be able to use it. The children would constantly be able to use it. And because it was a priority for me as a role model, it was a priority for the children, and they wanted to use it in their writing. Brilliant. And that's what it's all about. It's all about trying to do something really simple that we can commit to and stick to that has massive impact. And that's what I'm talking about. Going back to this is that we teach it, we record and display it really, really easily, and then we can constantly refer back to it orally and model it in our writing. We don't need, you can plan for that in your planning, but again, that's more work. Because you've got it up on your display board, you can just constantly refer back to that. And again, right at the start, I said it's about your state of mind, okay? Your consciousness to the opportunities that vocabulary present. By putting them on the display board, you can essentially forget about them for that moment, but then dip back into them whenever you need them, okay? Really, really effective teaching and learning. And then because of that, we can just use them in an ongoing fashion. And the idea behind the display system is that it's really linking into teaching and learning theory, predominantly Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve, which basically suggests from, if you look at this graph on the left, from the moment something's taught, the likelihood or someone's ability to recall that information drops significantly over time, as you can see here. 20 minutes to an hour, that ability to retain and recall that information is limited. All right. Now, to counteract that, if we have reminders, then the likelihood that that information is retained is hugely improved. Okay. So by having the display board is just a constant prompt for reminders. Okay. Spaced retrieval practice. Okay. So you've taught it, and it might be that later on that day, you reference it again. And in the afternoon, you reference it again. And then the next day, you reference it again. And you reference other words, and your teaching assistant reference words, and the children reference the words independently in their lessons because they're looking up there, they're looking in the back of their books. Yeah? All of these small, consistent, little tiny bits start to accumulate to something significant by just embedding this really simple system that doesn't really take any effort. It just takes that state of mind. And that's it, really. And the final little bit that I'm going to finish with is just, again, is a top teaching tip that we've sort of touched on right back at the start, which is around the words got, get, and went. And just to finish off, these are really 3 words that you can focus on that will have a massive impact on children's writing. And again, today's session was all about going away with top tips. So this is another top tip. Look at your children. And again, this is so true of pupil premium children. And the reason why they use got, get, and went a lot in their writing, and read their writing, and you'll see that these words crop up all the time. The reason why they use got, get, and went is because they don't have that other language that we want them to have to be able to articulate themselves. They just get things. I went here. I got that. But the only reason they're using those words is because they don't have the alternative verbs. And again, this is where the word of the day comes in, because we want to teach these words, teach these alternatives, okay? Because got and get don't mean anything. I'm going to show you some examples. So, I got it. And again, if this was children's writing, and I know it looks really simple, but I could really easily imagine a pupil premium child, potentially without stereotyping them, lower ability maybe. I could imagine them writing a sentence like this, not particularly great. Okay. And the problem with the sentence is the word got. It doesn't offer anything. There's not, as a reader, if you read that sentence in your head now, you can't garner anything else. You can't imagine. But if all of a sudden we have different word choices, more precise word choices, because they all got out of bed, it's how they got out of bed. So I raced out of bed. All of a sudden, the emotion, your brain automatically starts to think about the emotional mood of the character. Okay, or the subject. I raced out of bed. How are they feeling? Excited, probably. Why? I ambled out of bed. Okay, that was probably me this morning. Or it was definitely me the day after the session where I was in Nottingham. Okay, I ambled out of bed. Okay, why? And again, the mood. All of a sudden, the genre of the text feels different to I raced. I ambled out of bed, and I crept out of bed is right at the other end of the scale. Okay, it's maybe a spooky horror genre. I crept out of bed. But just that word choice only comes from the child's vocabulary. And again, these are all words that I would teach. Maybe not raced, maybe. Okay, but ambled and crept. How often do those crop up in all of the texts that you read to your children? All the time. Okay? Do they understand what they mean? I don't know. Maybe. But do we want to live with maybe? I'd rather them have ambled and crept as part of their vocabularies very, very early on. Okay. I'd probably imagine that crept could even be in bear hunt. I can't remember. Okay. Squelchy. I don't know. Possibly. But these words crop up in very, very young text, young stories. Okay? We want children to know what these words mean. The team needed to get another point. And every time I read this out, I always think it sort of leaves a hollow feeling inside my chest because it doesn't the word got here doesn't offer anything. It doesn't tell me anything about what's happening. And again, even just simple language, team needed to score another point. But the children can't be precise if they don't have the language to be precise. And if they haven't been exposed to that by the adults that they spend their time with, then they're not going to use that language. Okay. Sometimes we know again, the other end of the scale is look at some of the bad language that children use. Why do they use that language? Well, because they're exposed to it. Okay. If they're exposed to it a lot, they're probably very likely to use it. Okay. So it's just flipping that and thinking, well, this just makes complete sense. It's just sensible that the more often children will be exposed to high quality language, the more likely it is that they will be able to use it. And again, this is where within our writing, we can start to build these words into phrases. Fight for, fight to the death for another point. Brilliant. We went to the park. Okay. And again, this isn't vilifying got, get, and went. That will still be part of our writing. But it can't be they can't be the core verbs that we use when we're maybe writing narrative. That narrative is going to be awful if it's I got this and I went there and I needed to get that. And he's thinking, oh, it's really tough to read. And again, we wandered to the park, we snuck, we skipped, we wandered without a care in the world. I would teach wandered, and then while I was modelling it later in the week, that's when I would model, how could we expand the word wandered, children? How was the character feeling when they wandered? If we were reading Skellig, where David snuck into the garage, okay, how did he sneak into it? He snuck in carefully and something else. But why did he do that? Well, the garage was going to collapse and he didn't really know where Skellig was in the garage. Great. So we can use snuck and our understanding of that word, but we can expand that into a more descriptive phrase. Brilliant. And once the children see you do that often enough, they'll start to do it. Okay. Because they'll go, oh, wait there. That's pretty easy. And then because that word's on the board, they can then see it again tomorrow and think, oh, yeah, I'd forgotten that, but you've prompted the recall independently. You might have modeled it again. And that's how things start to stick. But that starts to happen because of the little system that we've got set up. Okay. So that is a top tip. And again, this is that sort of example of, as this, a typical sentence, as the sun went down, Alex grew colder and the roaring flames of his fire got smaller. And you're like, okay, great. I don't like got at the end, but you'd take it. Whereas actually we could model that into using some of the language, rather than it went down, it fell. The sun slowly fell below the horizon. Alex grew colder. The roaring flames of his fire got smaller. And then we could model to children, again, dwindled quickly into a dull glow. That's probably a bit expansive. But even if got smaller, just became dwindled, that would be fantastic. The roaring flames of his fire dwindled. Fantastic. Well done, Freddie. What a great use of dwindled. Oh, that's great, Mr. Jennings. It was on the board and I remembered it from last week. That's exactly what we wanted. So that's essentially what it's all about. Okay. I've given you a huge amount of tips about tier 1 vocabulary and how we can activate our environments and activate those simple routines, activate reading, activate PE. Okay, so there's a huge way we can do that without any extra time. And then more precisely is the word of the day, where we can teach vocabulary very, very explicitly via the word of the day from the text that you are teaching from. Okay, so again, you don't need to change anything if you've got a reading span and planned texts that you already teach from every year. Great. Just read a little bit ahead and pick out 5 words a week, teach them at the start of your English lesson and display them on the board. And just do that again and again and again. And once you've started, just don't stop. There's nothing extra that you need to do. Build it into something that you are doing already to have that activation effect of vocabulary for all of your pupils, but specifically your pupil premium children. So, I hope that session was, albeit well overrun. The beauty of doing it online this way is that I've been able to give you everything that I would have wanted to present and more. Okay. So again, just going back to those simple values. Vocabulary and everything that I've tried to offer today is all about simplicity and consistency. I don't want you going away thinking there's huge amounts of work to this, because there really isn't. It's about your mentality and your, not obligation, but your opportunity to become and to make that green bubble that we talked about at the start, that environment for children where your school and your classroom becomes the highest quality environment it can be for modeled language and communication and vocabulary in terms of how you speak, the opportunities that you activate and elicit, but then also your explicit instruction, which for me ideally just sits in the beginning of an English lesson, can be really easily adapted, and the display board that goes with it. So I really hope that you've got a lot of ideas and the practical resources to go with it as well. There are lots of other resources on my website that you can access, but I think there's a really great starting point from today's session. And I think there's a huge amount of value there for you, your class, your school, and your trust to be able to use vocabulary and utilize vocabulary to really be the caregivers of vocabulary that you can be for your pupil premium pupils. And I know that's what today's session, or the intended session, was all about. So once again, I just want to apologize again for what happened a few weeks ago. And I was really keen to make this recording and give you the best version that I could, to make sure that you have all this content and that you can hopefully, over the next week, maybe this term, start to implement some of these ideas and resources with your children and your pupil premium kids to have that really significant impact. So thanks for watching. If you do have any questions, you don't feel free to get in touch with me. It's just andrew@vocabularyninja.co.uk. You don't need to go via the trust. If you've got some questions around vocabulary, or there's something that sparked an interest there, please just get in touch with me directly, and I'll be more than happy to either supply some additional content or give you some further insight as well. So thank you for watching. I hope it's been useful, and hopefully I'll see you in person sometime. Thanks again.